Close your eyes and take a deep breath. Today I invite you into a legend beyond the quiet breath of this night. Stood a city that had carried the weight of empires for more than 1,000 years. Constantinople had seen emperors crowned beneath golden domes, armies turned away from its mighty walls, and prayers rise from Hagia Sophia into the dark blue sky. But in the spring of 1453, the city listened to a different sound. Beyond its gates, a young sultan gathered his army, his ships, and his great cannons. Inside the walls, the last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI, faced a choice that would define his name forever. He could leave, survive, and let the city fall behind him, or he could remain where history had placed him. As the final night drew closer, every stone of Constantinople seemed to hold its breath. Soldiers waited on the walls. Priests whispered prayers beneath trembling candlelight. Families looked toward the harbor, hoping for sails that might never come. And far beyond the city's ancient towers, the Ottoman camp glowed with fires, banners, and the silent promise of dawn. This was not only the story of a siege, it was the story of a city standing at the edge of an age, and of an emperor who chose to face that edge without turning away. Tonight we follow the last hours before one world ended and another began. Before we begin this epic, I have a small request that means a lot to me. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. The greatest reward for all the effort I put into creating these epics is your support through subscribing to my channel. If you enjoy my content and want me to continue creating more, your subscription and like truly give me great motivation. Also, don't forget to share your thoughts with me in the comments. Your comments not only encourage me, but also help me understand what kind of epics and stories you would like to see on this channel. Thank you so much in advance for your support. Take a deep breath, relax your mind, and let the rhythm of this ancient legend guide you, wishing you a peaceful sleep. The epic of the last night of Constantinople in 1453 begins now. Constantinople was still standing in the spring of 1453, but it no longer stood with the ease of the old imperial days. The dome of Hagia Sophia met the morning light. The docks along the Golden Horn kept their quiet daily motion. The Theodosian walls stretched across the landward side with the patience of many centuries, yet something in this view had grown thinner. Palace ceremonies had lost their old breadth. Neighborhoods had become sparse. News from the old provinces of the empire had been replaced by reports of lost borders and rumors of expected aid. The city remained at the center of a world that had become smaller on the map, but for its own people, it was still no ordinary city. It remained the last eastern refuge of the Roman name, the great memory of the Church, and the final home of the imperial title. Anyone who walked its streets felt, even without saying it, that the stones carried the present and the burden of older centuries. Constantine XI Palaiologos was the last emperor of this shrinking world. His rule did not feel like a secure throne over a vast state. It felt like responsibility for the last center that still had to be defended. The sources present him as the last Byzantine emperor, ruling from 1449 to 1453, and as the ruler who died in the final defense of Constantinople. But that dry fact was not enough to show the burden he carried in those days. Constantine was not surrounded by rich treasuries, endless soldiers, or certain allies. He was more often a ruler who counted what was missing, arranged what remained, listened for news of which walls needed repair, which force should be sent to which gate, and how late help from the sea had become. He seemed to live more with armor and council tables than with ceremonial robes. His face did not carry the calm of a man promising easy victory. It carried the careful stillness of someone who kept doing his duty without hiding the truth. The city's uncertainty did not come only from Ottoman preparations outside the walls. Inside Constantinople, old wounds, religious tension, and different kinds of hope lived side by side. The issue of union with the Roman Church had seemed like a political necessity for an empire hoping for help from the West. But it had not been accepted in the same way by all the people and clergy. Some saw Latin support as the last open door. Others saw this closeness as a continuation of painful memories from the past. The prayers around Hagia Sophia, the conversations inside monasteries, and the watch at the harbors were tied to the same fear, but they did not speak in the same voice. The city was tired within itself, even before the enemy army fully came before its walls. Constantine did not have the time to close this crack completely. What he could do was try to bring different fears into one line of defense. Rumeli Hisara, rising on the European side of the Bosporus, had made the city's loneliness more visible. Constantinople had been used to trusting the sea routes, but now every aid ship that might pass through the strait had to be imagined under the shadow of Ottoman control. News that great cannon were being cast in Edirne, that Mehmed II was preparing his army, and that roads and campaign plans were being completed, reached the palace and the harbors piece by piece. Each report changed the mood inside the city. Craftsmen inspected the walls, soldiers learned their posts, sailors discussed the safety of the chain across the Golden Horn. Daily work continued, but no action was fully ordinary anymore. Repairing a gate had become an act of defense. A line for bread quietly measured how long people might endure the coming siege. Around Constantine stood high officials, such as Lucas Notaras, Venetian and Genoese representatives, clergy, and military commanders. Each one carried a different need or fear of the city. Notaras thought about what remained of the state's order. Latin fighters calculated which lines of the wall they could defend best. Clergy tried to calm the fear of the people with prayer and patience. Yet above all these efforts stood one simple truth. The defenders were few. Help was uncertain, and across from them stood the growing power of a young and determined sultan. The city felt this, even when it did not say it openly. At night, guards listened to distant movement on the landward side. In the morning, people could not return to their work without noticing the sleeplessness on each other's faces. Before the siege began, Constantinople had grown more conscious of its own breath. As spring moved on, this careful silence grew heavier. The candles lit under the dome of Hagia Sophia, the sails expected at the harbors, the hands touching the stones of the walls, and the accounts kept in the palace were all drawing toward the same horizon. One morning, when Constantine looked out from the land walls, he saw more than an army coming closer. He saw his own life, his dynasty, and the long history of the city pressed into the same point. Constantinople had not fallen yet. Children's voices, church bells, and market talk still moved through its streets. But beneath those sounds another rhythm had settled. The city was still alive, but it had begun to hold its breath. Its last night had not yet arrived on the calendar, but the road toward that night had begun in these days, when people spoke less to one another and looked longer. The city's geography deepened that sense of pressure. The shore of the Marmara Sea, the inward curve of the Golden Horn, and the long walls on the landward side had given Constantinople a defense shaped by both nature and human labor. For centuries, that shape had given confidence to emperors. In 1453, the same geography also created a feeling of being closed in. Ottoman power stood on the landward side. Aid by sea remained uncertain. Control on the Bosporus was growing. Hope in the Golden Horn was tied to a chain. The city had become great because of its position. Now that same position made it feel like a narrow stage watched by the world. The people in the streets did not think of this great geographic calculation as if they were reading a map. But anyone who looked toward the harbor knew where help might come from. Anyone who climbed the walls knew where danger would stand. Constantinople felt the meaning of its place one last time with painful clarity. Around the imperial palace, traces of the old order could still be seen, but these traces did not feel like secure continuity. They felt like fragile reminders. There was still a throne, ceremonies, seals, and titles, but the material power behind them had narrowed. Constantine's rule did not rely on grand displays. It moved through small decisions that divided up scarcity. Who would receive which duty? Which unit would hold which position? Which foreign commander should be trusted with which line? Which news should be given to the people, and how? These questions made up the daily rule of the last emperor. His tragedy was not simply that the city might fall. Even before the end, every decision had to be made with limited means. Constantine's dignity came not from absolute power, but from refusing to abandon responsibility while holding too few tools. Mehmed II's move toward Constantinople did not come from a sudden desire. The young sultan had clearly seen the political gap the city left within Ottoman lands, its strategic weight over the Bosporus, and the symbolic power carried by the Roman inheritance. If Constantinople was taken, more than a fortress would fall. The old center standing between the European and Asian sides of the Ottoman state could become a new imperial capital. In Mehmed's mind, this thought had a meaning larger than the wish for war. If the city was conquered, it would have to be governed, repopulated, protected, and made into the center of a new order. For that reason, the preparations that began in Edirne moved less like a simple campaign and more like the laying of stones for a future authority. Mehmed knew why earlier sieges had failed. This time he tried to bring patience, cannon power, naval pressure, and land pressure into one plan. The casting of cannon became one of the most striking faces of these preparations. The founder, known in the sources as Urban, together with the Ottomans' own artillery experience, stood out in the making of weapons that could shake great walls. These cannon were more than tools of war. They were like the heavy voice of a new age aimed at stone walls in which the people of the city had trusted. Making such a cannon was difficult, but moving it before Constantinople was difficult as well. Roads were prepared. People and animals were called on to pull the heavy bodies. Passages were calculated. Sieges are often remembered by their final assault, but the result of this siege was prepared in weeks of measuring, hauling, stopping, and trying again. Each great piece that left Edirne carried a decision toward the city's fate even before it ever fired. The statesmen around Mehmed did not all think the same way. Tsandala Halil Pasha represented a more cautious kind of statecraft. He considered the risks of a long siege, possible reactions from Europe, and the wearing down of the army. Zaanos Pasha and the circles that favored conquest supported the young sultan's determination. This disagreement keeps the Ottoman side from sounding like a simple single voice. Mehmed's strength came not from everyone sharing the same excitement, but from his ability to gather different calculations under his own goal. He knew the city before him was tired, but he also saw that its walls could not be taken lightly. The name of Constantinople itself could place a psychological weight on soldiers. Preparation, therefore, had to be moral and political as well as material. The Sultan had to give his army the feeling that it was not setting out on a simple raid, but to complete a great work long expected. The gathering of the army showed the growing scale of the Ottoman state. Sipahis, infantry, gunners, naval forces, and troops from different regions were directed toward the same target. Each group carried the meaning of the campaign in its own world. Some expected spoils. Some were obeying the Sultan's order. Some believed they were marching toward a religious and historical goal. Mehmed tied this variety to a single siege order. Pressure would be placed from the sea toward the Golden Horn and the Marmara, and from the land against the Theodosian walls. The city would not be squeezed from a single point, but from all the paths by which it breathed. Control of the Bosporus would make it harder for aid ships to reach the city. The great cannon would keep wearing down the land walls. There was speed in this plan, but also patience. The Sultan trusted the pressure of many days more than one sudden day of victory. Another side of the preparations in Edirne was that Mehmed already had the order after conquest in mind. If Constantinople had been seen only as an enemy center to be destroyed, the meaning of the siege would have been narrower. Mehmed, however, imagined himself as the new owner and organizer of the city after taking it. For him, conquest was therefore more than a military success. It was a matter of legitimacy. Taking the city would strengthen the authority of a sultan who had come to the throne young and needed to make his rule accepted. Failure would be more than a military retreat. It could become a political shock. This risk made Mehmed more careful. The determination seen in the sources was not the result of blind anger. It was the will of a ruler who had tied great consequences to himself. The city before him was old, but the methods used to take it carried signs of a new period. As the Ottoman army moved toward Constantinople, the weight of the campaign was felt on the roads. The movement of the great cannon was slow, the flow of soldiers was broad. The eyes of the commanders were fixed on the target. Even before the city's walls appeared, the siege had already begun, because Constantinople was no longer simply holding its breath. It had begun to hear the sound of an organized power moving toward it. For Mehmed, the end of the road would be the camp set before the walls. For Constantine, that same road meant the decision made in Edirne was coming to his own gate. The two rulers, in separate worlds, were being drawn toward the same point. One was counting the last means left to protect the old capital. The other was gathering the full energy of his state to take that capital. The siege had not yet started, but the decision had already been made. Rumeli Hizara, built earlier, held a special place in Mehmed's campaign preparation. This control point over the Bosporus was one of the most concrete steps that narrowed Constantinople's connection with the outside world. Support that might come from the Black Sea, commercial passage, and diplomatic contact could no longer be imagined as freely as before. The city was famous for its land walls, but the Ottoman plan did not look only at those walls. Cutting off the breath that might come by sea would increase the siege's chance of success. Mehmed's preparation was therefore not a simple line that began in the foundry and ended on the battlefield. Fortresses, roads, the fleet, cannon, supplies, and the order of the camp were all pieces of the same plan. When those pieces came together, Constantinople became a center whose connections were being closed step by step before it became a battlefield. The human face of the decision in Edirne could also be seen outside the meetings of great commanders, the craftsmen around the cannon, the workers who handled iron and bronze, the men who prepared animals, and the people who carried supplies for the campaign carried the unseen burden of this great goal. Every great historical event moves forward through labor that receives little space in chronicles. The Ottoman army's arrival before Constantinople became possible through the Sultan's will and through countless small jobs completed in time. When Mehmed oversaw this order, he knew the conquest had begun before it reached the battlefield. The weight of preparation did not hide his youth. It showed how a young ruler placed himself at the center of a great undertaking. For this reason, the Ottoman preparation moved forward with ambition, work, and planning. In Constantinople, the approaching siege was felt on the walls and inside the churches. The issue of union with Rome had been one of the most sensitive matters of the city's final years. Constantine had supported this policy because he needed help from the West, but many people and clergy did not accept the closeness easily. The memory of the Latin capture of the city in 1204 had not disappeared even after so much time. For this reason, the idea of aid from the West carried both hope and unease. Latin representatives entering Hagia Sophia represented a possible rescue for some and the reopening of an old wound for others. While the city waited for the Ottoman army outside, it also struggled with its own memory inside. This showed how complex the ground under the defense already was before the fighting began. The arrival of Cardinal Isidore became one visible sign of this contradiction. He represented the idea of union with Rome, and the limited military support he brought showed that the West was paying attention. At the same time, it also showed how little help had actually arrived. Some in the city welcomed him with hope. Others watched him from a distance. His presence around Hagia Sophia and in palace discussions showed that the religious argument had become directly tied to the defense. Union was about more than the form of worship. It touched how many ships would reach the harbors, which Latin soldiers would stand on the walls, and how much of the outside world still thought Constantinople was worth defending. So the reaction of the people was not uniform. They wanted help, but they also feared what that help might cost them. Constantine was not in a position to solve this division completely. Before him stood both Mehmed's preparations and the damaged trust of his own city. At this point, the emperor's approach became less a matter of harsh pressure and more an attempt to use the time well. He could not wait until everyone thought the same way about the matter of faith, but everyone still had to defend the same walls. So he gave more weight to councils, assignments, and defensive positions. His loneliness became clearer here. He had to ask for help from the West, but the symbols of that help disturbed part of his own people. What the city needed also created a split inside the city. Constantine did not remove this contradiction with long explanations. As the days grew narrower, words gave way to more concrete work. Gates were inspected, soldiers were counted, ships in the harbor were checked, and wall lines were arranged again. Lucas Notarus and other high officials tried to manage what remained of the state's resources. Notarus's position was more than an aristocratic presence. It was tied to the city's administrative and naval security matters. The condition of the Golden Horn, the protection of the harbors, the function of the chain, and order inside the city concerned men like him. Yet no duty could hide the general weakness of the city. Venetians, Genoese, Byzantine soldiers and volunteers would stand within the same defense. There were old rivalries and distrust among them, but there were very few choices left. This was no flawless heroic unity. It was a forced partnership. But final defenses are often built in just this way. People may not fully trust one another and still stand before the same danger. The defense of Constantinople took shape through that fragile partnership. The people lived with the results of high politics without knowing all its details. Around the harbors, news of sales was discussed. In markets, people whispered about food prices and the condition of stores. In monasteries, they asked whether God would still show mercy to the city. In homes, people stood longer before icons. Some families tried to keep their children away from places near the walls. Others prepared men who would join the defense without knowing whether they would return. The streets looked the same, but the steps of the people had changed. They lingered less and listened more. Every new report cast a shadow over what had been said before. The approach of the Ottoman army did not solve any religious argument. It only pushed them all beneath the same urgent need. Constantine's defense council gained greater meaning in this atmosphere. The question was no longer who approved of which service. The question was which gate would be held by which unit. Still, the past did not disappear completely. Every decision passed through older distrust. The emperor knew he had not been given perfect unity. What he had been given was a tired but not defeated city, limited Latin support, a disputed religious compromise, and walls that could still resist. He had to build a defense from these materials. The division inside Hagia Sophia fell silent when it faced the power waiting outside the walls, but it did not vanish. The city's later resistance would not grow from perfect harmony, but from a delayed necessity. The division inside Hagia Sophia did not belong only to the clergy. It also showed itself in daily behavior. Some people watched the presence of Latin soldiers with cold acceptance because they knew the defense would be weaker without them. Others could not easily accept the same people appearing in sacred spaces. Even when these reactions did not turn into open conflict, they lived in glances and whispers. As the siege approached, people had to choose whom to trust, but trust could not be built by command. Constantine therefore had to rule a city that was short of resources and emotionally divided. This divided structure would gain a brief common rhythm during the final night in Hagia Sophia. But until that moment, everyone carried their own past with them. The limited nature of Western aid made the religious argument more painful. If great armies and fleets had appeared, the cost of union might have been easier for some to accept. But when the support remained small, people asked themselves whether enough strength had come in return for what had been conceded. This question made Constantine's position harder. He had acted within diplomatic reality, but the people measured the result of diplomacy through their fear. For that reason, Cardinal Isidore's name carried both the meaning of a churchman and the symbol of a great expectation that had not been fulfilled. The city felt the lack of help as both a military shortage and a sign of being left far from the world. As the Ottoman army approached, Constantinople turned its attention once more to the land walls. The Theodosian walls were the city's greatest hope and its heaviest responsibility. The moat, outer wall, inner wall, and towers had stood against many attacks over the centuries, but in 1453 they would face not only ladders and rams, but also great cannon. The defenders acted with this truth in mind. Damaged places were inspected. The areas around the gates were checked. Weak points were marked. The work of masons, soldiers, and civilians mixed together. In some places, rubble was carried. In others, wooden supports were prepared. In others, the edges of the moat were cleared. The city seemed to reach out and touch its own walls one last time. This preparation was not a glorious ceremony. It was quiet work carried on by tired hands. The arrival of Giovanni Giustiniani Longo was of great importance for the defense. The Genoese commander was experienced in siege warfare and strong in military practice. With the force he brought, he took his place in the most critical parts of the land walls. Constantine quickly understood his value, because the city needed technical knowledge as much as courage. Giustiniani mattered for more than the number of soldiers he brought. He was a man of war who knew how breaches should be closed, how defense should be arranged after cannon fire, and how soldiers should be held in narrow spaces. The sources show that his wounding during the final assault had a heavy effect on morale, so his first appearance in the story also quietly prepared the later breaking point. Between him and Constantine, a necessary and serious trust began to form. The defense was spread across the city. On the landward side, the most critical line lay around the Lycus Valley and the nearby areas, because the ground and the condition of the walls made it natural for pressure to gather there. Edirne, the gates, the Marmara shore, the Golden Horn side, and the inner harbors were all considered separately. The Venetian bailo Girolamo Minotto and other Latin representatives took positions with their own men at certain points. Byzantine commanders and local forces had to stand beside them. This arrangement was not perfect, but it was the most realistic defense possible with the means at hand. Every post was more than a military position. It was a decision about how limited manpower would be divided. Strengthening one line could leave another more fragile. The chain across the Golden Horn was one of the most important signs of naval defense. The city tried to protect its northern inner harbor with this barrier, because if the Ottoman fleet entered the Golden Horn, the defense would have to split across more fronts. While men like Lucas Notaras were concerned with the naval side, Giustiniani and Constantine on the land walls faced a different pressure. The small city fleet, the ships that might come from the west, and the condition of the harbors were discussed constantly. But the defenders knew that every hope by sea would be tested by the Bosporus and the Ottoman fleet. The chain was therefore more than a tool. It was like one of the last security lines the city could still close around itself. The calm surface of the Golden Horn did not hide the storm that was coming. The inspections on the walls made Constantine's rule more concrete. He did not remain an emperor who gave orders from a distance. He appeared among the soldiers, received reports from commanders, and listened to what was missing. His presence carried symbolic weight in the eyes of the defenders. Yet that symbol was built not through noisy display, but through his steady presence at the place of duty. Constantine's face did not offer people the easy certainty of comforting words. It showed a calm that did not disorder itself, even while knowing the size of the danger. Giustiniani brought a different weight, harder, more technical, more direct. Their work together showed the two basic needs of the city's final defense, meaning and method. One represented why the city should be defended. The other represented how it could be defended. As the Ottoman vanguard and preparations became visible opposite the walls, all these arrangements moved from theory into reality. The names of gates, the height of towers, the depth of moats, and the number of units were no longer dry calculations. They were a living defensive order about to be tested before an approaching army. People in the city looked more often toward the walls. Some looked with trust, others with fear. The Theodosian walls had protected Constantinople for centuries. Now their strength depended not only on stone, but on how people would repair them through the nights, how commanders would decide, and how long defenders would remain in place before fear. As the Ottoman army settled into position, the city took its place in the defense. The period of quiet preparation ended. The test of the stones was ready to begin. The physical structure of the Theodosian walls shaped the behavior of the defenders. The moats were not only empty spaces to cross, but the first obstacles that slowed an attack. The outer wall would delay the attackers. The inner wall and towers would form the main points of resistance. But cannon fire weakened the old confidence in this order. The defenders were no longer only soldiers looking down from high places. They were people who went down before broken stones, filled gaps, and built temporary barriers where the old wall no longer held. This change brought onto the stage the trial of medieval defensive architecture before new war technology. The walls were still impressive, but impressiveness alone was no longer enough. Human labor, engineering knowledge, and night repairs had to complete the old pride of stone. Giustiniani's participation in the defense became one of the most practical examples of Latin-Byzantine cooperation. Foreign aid that was disputed in matters of faith and politics became, in his person, a necessary expertise on the battlefield. Giustiniani's men might not always have felt close to the city's people, but their function on the walls could not be questioned. His severity was different from Constantine's more solemn presence. While the emperor's quiet authority gave soldiers meaning, Giustiniani's experience gave them method. This pairing would be very important in the last days of the defense. To remain on the wall, it was not enough to know why. One also had to know how to endure. These two forces came together not in long speeches, but in the movement of assigned duties and inspected damaged points. When the Ottoman cannon began to fire, Constantinople finally heard the sound it had long been waiting for. This sound was different from the siege noises the people of the city already knew. The heavy shots struck not only the walls, but also the sense of trust those walls had given for centuries. Stones shook, dust rose around the towers. The soldiers waiting before the moats learned the rhythm of a new age of war. Each shot from the great cannon required long preparation, pulling back, loading again, and aiming once more. But its effect was felt inside the city immediately. People listened less to the explosion itself than to the silence that followed. In that silence, everyone tried to understand the same thing. Were the walls still standing, or were the strongest walls of the old world slowly opening? Giustiniani and the defenders quickly inspected the damaged points. Places broken by cannon fire during the day were filled through the night with rubble, earth, barrels, timber, and any material that could be used. Soldiers and civilians were not separate in this work. A stone carried by one person became as valuable as a shield held by another. The defense now continued not only on high towers, but also in temporary barriers built before broken places. Giustiniani's experience showed itself here. It was not possible to restore the wall perfectly to its old form. What mattered was creating a new surface of resistance that could keep an attack from pouring through. In this way, the city began to move like a body that was partly broken each day and closed again each night. This cycle showed that the defenders were racing against time. Mehmed watched the effect of the cannon with patience. It was not realistic to expect the walls to collapse at once. The defense of Constantinople had been formed by centuries of experience. But the Ottoman plan did not depend on creating a miracle with one shot. It depended on exhausting the defense through continuous pressure. As the cannon shook the walls, Ottoman units observed the moats, the gates, and the defenders' reactions. Small probes, night movements, and the places where fire became heavy formed the siege's process of learning. For the Sultan, each day made the city's weak points a little clearer. Patience was also needed in the Ottoman camp. The care of the great cannon, the preparation of ammunition, the order of the soldiers, and the movement of the fleet had to continue at the same time. The siege turned into a long trial that slowly wore down both sides. The people of the city did not hear the cannon only from a distance. They felt it enter daily life. In some houses, windows were closed. Children were moved into inner rooms. Prayers in churches lasted longer. Yet life did not stop completely. Bread was still baked. Water was carried for tired and wounded soldiers. Roads leading to the walls were kept open. This continuing life did not develop like a show of great bravery. It became a necessary habit. People learned to move with fear because they could not remove it. After each cannon shot, the city seemed to check itself, then breathe again when it realized it was still standing. That breath was sometimes short, sometimes heavy, but it was still real. The resistance of Constantinople in the first days came from this, not from certain safety, but from realizing again and again that it had not yet fallen. Constantine knew in these days that morale could not be protected by words alone. His appearance on the walls, his entry into the same area of danger as the soldiers, and his direct contact with commanders mattered for this reason. The emperor's presence showed that the city was still being governed. Yet he also saw what every new damage meant. Every breach meant more labor, more night watches, and more exhaustion. Giustiniani's practical severity and Constantine's calm determination came together on the same line. One told the soldiers where to stand, the other made them feel why they must not scatter. The defense went on for days in this way. Cannon fire, repair, another shot, another repair. This cycle was not the bright rise of an epic. It was the heavy test of patience. At the end of the first days of bombardment, the city had still not fallen. This mattered to the defenders, because after the great sound they had feared, they saw that the walls had not completely come apart. But this small relief did not last. Everyone now knew the power of the cannon, and everyone understood that this power could continue for days. The Ottoman side had also measured the strength of the walls and had seen more clearly where pressure should be increased. Constantinople had survived the first blow, but from then on, every day would pass behind a wall that had lost a little more of itself. The silence of night repair and the noise of daytime fire became the new calendar of the siege. The city no longer measured the hours only by bells, but by cannon shots and the feet of people carrying stones. The dust rising after the cannon shots changed the city's sense of time. To understand how much damage one strike had done, people had to wait, and the waiting was often heavier than the strike itself. The defenders could not know exactly what had fallen until the dust cleared. Then the running began. One person searched for stones, another carried wood, another stood guard before a half-closed wall. These movements created the special order of the siege days. Days became the time of breaking, nights the time of repair. The city no longer saw darkness only as rest. Night became the one interval in which the defense could be built again. Every darkness offered a short and urgent pause before the cannon fire of the next day. The work of the Ottoman gunners was not easy either. The great cannon required heavy labor and care. The intervals between shots, the strength of the barrels, the movement of ammunition, and the correction of aim demanded constant attention. This detail shows how wearing the siege was for both sides. Inside the walls, people repaired in fear, while outside other people kept a great war machine working. Mehmed tied that labor to one target, breaking the wall's habit of endurance. The sound of the cannon was therefore not only physical power, it was a repeated act of will. Each shot asked the city the same question: can you close yourself again? Every night the defenders tried to answer with stone and earth. As the pressure of the siege increased, a few sails seen from the sea had a greater effect on Constantinople than anyone might have expected. The city had long lived with news of help that might come from the west, so every ship on the horizon appeared not only as a vessel, but as a sign that the outside world had not completely closed the door. Around the Golden Horn and the Marmara, people turned their eyes toward the water. Harbor workers, guards on the walls, and soldiers inside the city watched the same movement. The supplies and support carried by the ships might be limited, but their approach briefly widened spirits that had been narrowed for days by cannon fire. This hope was larger than the facts, because a few ships could not change the whole result of the siege. Still, for a city under siege, a small sail is sometimes discussed more than a great army. The Ottoman fleet tried to block the ship's passage. The struggle on the water had a different rhythm from the heavy pace at the land walls. Wind, oars, opening sails, ships drawing close to each other, and people watching from the shore gave the scene a more active tension. For the defenders, the question was not only whether the ships would enter. The power of the Ottoman fleet at sea was also being tested. When the ships managed to reach the Golden Horn, a brief wave of joy passed through the city. This joy was not really the illusion that victory had come. It was the relief of feeling they were not alone. Western aid, uncertain for so long, had for that moment become visible as real decks, real sails, and real human faces. For Mehmed, this event was a difficult setback to accept. For a sultan who wanted to keep the siege under control on every front, the ships reaching the city were not only a tactical failure, they could also affect morale in front of the army. The Ottoman fleet's failure to stop this passage created serious discomfort in the Sultan's camp. Yet one of the traits Mehmed showed during the siege was the ability to turn setbacks into new moves. If the sea did not produce a full result, another way into the Golden Horn had to be considered. That thought would produce one of the most striking movements of the following days. The Sultan showed that he did not have to enter the city's supposedly safe inner water only by the ordinary rules of naval battle. Inside Constantinople, the arrival of the ships created expectation as much as morale. Some people thought more help would soon come. Others understood that this was only delayed and limited support. For Constantine, this event was a relief that had to be handled carefully. The city's resistance had gained morale, but the military facts had not changed. The walls were still under pressure. Cannon fire continued. Supplies were limited. Further aid was not certain. Giustiniani would not have welcomed a joy that made people forget the main danger on the land walls. The success from the sea showed that the defense would not collapse at once, but it did not lift the siege. So the hope in the city lived immediately beside measured concern. People rejoiced, then returned to carrying stones, taking posts, and praying. The ships that reached the Golden Horn also changed the meaning of the Latin presence inside the city for a short time. Western support, which had earlier been a matter of argument and mistrust, had that day turned into concrete help. Venetian and Genoese sailors seemed not only like foreign allies, but like bearers of the breath that people inside the walls had been waiting for. Even so, old tensions did not vanish completely. The siege brought people together under the same danger, but it did not make them forget the past. For that day, however, the road opened by the sea spoke more strongly than the arguments around Hagia Sophia. Everyone in the city knew that ships the Ottoman fleet had failed to stop had entered the Golden Horn. This knowledge left a living light inside the dark days, even if only for a short time. The light did not last long, because Mehmed's new solution was approaching. In the Ottoman camp, the failure at sea was not an end, but the beginning of another route. The idea of moving ships overland into the Golden Horn would place the city's defensive order under a new psychological pressure. That evening, Constantinople may have heard hopeful talk in its harbors, but on the other side a quiet preparation had begun. The aid from the sea gave the city a day. For the Sultan, it strengthened the reason to force the gate of the Golden Horn in a different way. In this way, the same event took on two meanings. Constantinople saw the ships as a sign of rescue. Mehmed saw their passage as proof that even the water thought safe had to be brought under threat. The arrival of the ships created a brief lift in the rhythm of the siege. The movement of people toward the harbors and the watching from the walls showed how much hope needs a visible form. For weeks, news of aid had been abstract. When the ships were seen with the eyes, the expected world became real for a moment. It was not enough to change the outcome of the war immediately, but morale in a besieged society can move faster than numbers. One sail entering the Golden Horn became news that reached a baker, a soldier on watch, and a praying priest at the same time. That day, the city did not feel completely forgotten. The fact that this feeling was brief did not reduce its value. It showed how little light remained in the darkness of the siege. On the Ottoman side, the tension caused by the naval failure tested Mehmed's command style again. When a ruler's great plan meets a setback, there are two roads: break apart in anger, or turn the failure into a new solution. Mehmed chose the second road. The fleet's failure to stop the ships may have been a humiliating moment for him, but it also pushed him to think of another way into the Golden Horn. The sea scene, therefore, did not remain only a success for the aid ships. It became the reason for a bolder engineering and logistical move on the Ottoman side. Events silently produced one another. The moment that made the city rejoice also began the next great threat. The movement of Ottoman ships overland into the Golden Horn became one of the most striking psychological moves of the siege. The people of Constantinople had been used to seeing the Golden Horn as a safer area because of the chain and the order of the inner harbor. When eyes turned toward the water in the morning and Ottoman ships appeared inside, that sense of safety was deeply shaken. The effect of that moment cannot be explained only in military terms. The people of the city saw the map of defense change overnight. The threat that had been kept outside was now standing on the waters of the Golden Horn. This sight created a different fear from cannon fire. A wall breaking was an expected danger, but seeing foreign ships fill the water considered safe closed another door in the mind. Mehmed's move showed that during the siege, he applied pressure not only with brute force, but also with unexpected action. The details of moving the ships overland are told in different ways in the sources, but the general effect of the event is clear. The Ottomans changed the balance of defense on the Golden Horn side. This forced the city to divide soldiers across more fronts. For an already limited number of defenders, every new line of threat carried the danger of weakening the land walls. Constantine and his commanders could no longer look only toward the Lycus Valley and the main breaches. The security of the inner harbor now required constant attention. The siege became a tighter ring around Constantinople. Lucas Notaris's role on the seaside grew more important at this point. Protecting the Golden Horn was not only a matter of ship movement. The morale inside the city, harbor security, and the pressure created by Ottoman ships were all tied to it. Notaris and those responsible for naval defense tried to take measures against the new situation, but every measure drew from the same limited store of people and material. Assigning more attention to the Golden Horn meant taking strength from somewhere else. Giustiniani, focused on the land walls, would not want the main line of defense weakened. This tension was not a personal dispute alone. It was the structural problem of the entire defense. The city had too much to protect and too few people to protect it. Constantine stood at the center of this balance. Every choice meant leaving another place more fragile. The Ottoman ships in the Golden Horn changed the mood of the harbors. What had recently been the place where aid ships created joy now became the place where the enemy's presence created unease. The same water took on a second meaning. People who looked from the shore could not see the Golden Horn as only an inner refuge anymore. It had become a front. This change brought the siege deeper into the city's daily imagination. The threat was no longer only at the land walls. It had appeared in the water that curved into the heart of Constantinople. In the minds of the people, the city grew smaller. Countermeasures against the Ottoman ships were attempted or discussed. The idea of destroying them or limiting their effect by attack was natural, but the conditions were difficult. Darkness, the defensive chain, the condition of the fleet, and the risk of failure made every move dangerous. Any action taken in the Golden Horn had to be considered along with the pressure on the walls. The defenders could not spend strength as if they had endless reserves. The limited success of such efforts increased the feeling of being squeezed. The Ottomans had not necessarily gained full control over the entire inner water, but they had broken the idea that the Golden Horn was beyond reach. That was enough to change the psychology of the siege. For Mehmed, the success of this move was not measured only by the position of the ships. It was measured by the way the city was forced to react. Every additional worry inside the walls served the Ottoman plan. The defense that had already been worn down by cannon fire now had to look more often toward the water. The people who had hoped for help from the Golden Horn had to accept that a new threat had entered from the same direction. This was the kind of pressure that worked not by one sudden blow, but by narrowing mental space. The people of the city began to feel that every direction was becoming uncertain. The land walls were under fire. The sea route was unreliable. The Golden Horn had changed. Aid was still not enough. Each of these facts might have been bearable alone. Together, they formed a heavier cage. In this period, Constantine's task became even more difficult. He had to keep the morale of the defenders without pretending the situation was better than it was. Too much hope could break into despair. Too much truth could lead to surrender. This balance was one of the hardest parts of ruling under siege. Constantine could not create soldiers out of nothing or summon fleets from a silent horizon, but he could try to prevent existing forces from scattering. His presence at councils, on the walls, and near the critical points held the remaining order together for a time. Notaris's practical concerns on the seaside and Giustiniani's insistence on the land walls met in that same effort. Each man saw the siege from the line he knew best. The emperor had to see them all at once. The movement of ships into the Golden Horn also affected the ordinary people who did not take part in military decisions. A woman who had looked toward the harbor hoping for aid now looked at the same water with fear. A sailor who understood the currents and passages had to admit that the shape of the water was no longer enough to protect the city. A priest who prayed for help from the sea now heard darker whispers after morning. These small changes matter because sieges are not fought only by soldiers. They are also fought in the imagination of the people trapped inside. When a place once thought safe changes meaning, the spirit of the city loses another layer of shelter. The Golden Horn had not vanished, but its face had changed. As the siege continued, the endurance of Constantinople was tested not only on the battlefield, but inside homes as well. The need to use supplies carefully became clearer. Storehouses, bakeries, water routes, and harbor connections were now part of military decision-making. Food in the city had not completely run out, but uncertainty changed people's appetite and sleep. A family spoke less at the evening table. People standing outside a bakery turned their eyes more often toward the doors. A soldier returning from watch could not fall asleep at once. These details showed the inner face of the siege. Cannon fire and news from the sea told of pressure outside, but shrinking supplies gnawed at patience from within. Constantinople still stood, but it had to live each day by measuring more of everything. Rumors multiplied easily in this atmosphere. Some remembered old prophecies. Some interpreted lights in the sky. Some spoke of the city's past sins. In societies under siege, news and belief, fear and hope draw near to one another, and Constantinople could not escape this. Even when an event had a military explanation, people looked for its spiritual meaning. That search was a sign of helplessness, but also an effort to find order. People found it hard to endure chance. They thought every shock, every delay, and every failed report of aid had to carry a larger meaning. Clergy tried to calm their congregations, but there was tiredness on their faces as well. Prayer became more than a request for rescue. It became a rhythm that kept fear from scattering. During this period, different paths seem to have been suggested to the emperor. The sources and later accounts show that the idea could arise not only of standing on the walls, but of preserving the dynasty somewhere else. A ruler's survival, the continuation of the imperial family, or the hope of resistance in another place could all be presented as reasons. But the place where Constantine stood had already moved beyond those calculations. For him, the city's burden was no longer carried in palace rooms, but on the roads leading to the gates and walls. Constantinople, under its old name, was not only a center of government for him, it was the last visible field of the Roman imperial name. If he left, the defense would lose not only a man, but also meaning. So his choice rested not on a loud scene, but on a sense of duty that had built over many days. Giustiniani focused on the military realities of the defense. For him, hope was not an abstract feeling. It depended on how quickly breaches were closed, how much rest soldiers could get after watch duty, and where cannon fire was becoming heavier. This practical view completed Constantine's symbolic burden. The defense could not continue only with the idea of the Holy City. It also needed stone, timber, shields, manpower, and correctly placed units. Giustiniani's presence showed that the city was still learning how to fight. But tiredness increased among his men as well. Every night of repairs, every renewed attack by day, and every false report reduced the power to endure a little. The resistance did not break, but it grew more costly. The small movements of the people carried the true face of the siege. A mother did not turn the moment into a ceremony when she straightened the cloth on the shoulder of her son going to the walls. Her hand only stayed there a little longer. A craftsman did not make a story of heroism when he gave the wood from his shop for the defense. He simply accepted that the city now mattered more than the goods. A priest did not raise his voice as he repeated the same prayer, because the congregation needed rhythm more than noise. These small actions carried the quiet behavior of a society under siege. The city resisted through large decisions, but also through these small acts of giving things up. Not everyone lost the same thing, but everyone gave up something. As May advanced, the mood in Constantinople grew heavier. The number of aid ships had remained limited. The sense of safety in the Golden Horn had weakened. The land walls had been tested constantly. Even so, the city did not surrender. This fact can be told without creating an exaggerated hope of victory, because the defenders now understood the value of lasting one more day more than the promise of a miracle. Constantine's presence, Giustiniani's preparation, Notaris's administrative efforts, the prayers of clergy, and the quiet service of the people came together on the same line. But that line had grown thin. The siege was no longer pressure from outside alone. Time itself had grown heavier inside. Each new morning was less secure than the last. The city did not know the date of the final assault, but it had entered a period in which people understood, even without speaking, that the assault was drawing closer. In cities under siege, time does not move like the calendar outside. In Constantinople, days were no longer remembered by the date of the month, but by which news arrived, which part of the wall held, which ship appeared and disappeared. People walked the same streets, but each passing showed a slight change. There was a new pile of stone on one corner. In another place, supplies were being stored more carefully. At the door of one house, a prayer lasted longer. These small changes showed the city's exhaustion. Great historical narratives often focus on the final assault. But what made the final assault possible was this slow wearing away. Constantinople approached the last threshold, not in one night, but through many days of declining strength and growing uncertainty. Prophecies and signs were not only products of fear, they were also the result of the human need to give meaning to events. The idea that an imperial capital might fall was too large to accept as an ordinary military defeat. So people turned toward lights in the sky, old sayings, religious texts, and memories of earlier disasters. Every interpretation of a sign spreading through the city sought an answer to the same question: how could an end this great be possible? Clergy sometimes calmed this search, and sometimes carried its weight themselves. These rumors were not mocked, and they were not turned into certain knowledge. They lived as the search for meaning by people who had little control left. The siege tested people not only with hunger, but with the need for meaning. As the end of May approached, the length of the siege created different feelings in the Ottoman camp. The walls had been worn down. An unexpected advantage had been gained on the Golden Horn side, and the cannon had done its work for days. Yet the city still had not fallen. Long sieges wear down attackers as well as defenders. The patience of soldiers, the calculations of commanders, the questions of supplies and order have to be thought through again each day. Mehmed saw this truth. The choice before him was to continue the pressure indefinitely or gather all preparations into one great assault. Before the final attack, decisions and preparations became more intense on the Ottoman side. At this stage, conquest was no longer a desire alone. It was the final risk that had to be managed with care. The presence of more cautious men such as Sandalu Halil Pasha keeps the atmosphere of the camp from becoming one-dimensional. It could be argued that a longer siege might give time for European intervention, strain the morale of the army, and damage the Sultan's authority if a final assault failed. Against this, Zaanos Pasha and those who favored attack argued that the city had been weakened enough and that the last blow should not be delayed. Mehmed's decision matured between these different voices. He did not ignore caution completely, but he knew delay also carried its own risk. If the city held longer, the weight of the siege could begin to turn against the Ottoman side as well. The final assault was therefore a matter of timing as much as courage. The order of the last attack was planned in stages. First would come units meant to tire the defense. Then more organized forces would follow. Finally, the chosen troops would press the critical points. This kind of order shows that Ottoman siege strategy did not depend only on numbers. The purpose was to keep the defenders from breathing through the night, increase their exhaustion, and bring the most effective force forward at the breaking moment. In Mehmed's eyes, the Lycus Valley and the sections battered by cannon fire were natural targets. Damage watched for days shaped the direction of the final attack. In this way, the bombardment, the move into the Golden Horn, and the constant probes came together on one final line. The city did not yet know that the pressure it had faced piece by piece would be gathered into one night. Preparations in the Ottoman camp were not only military orders. Soldiers were reminded of expected reward and victory. Religious encouragement was given. The places of units were arranged. Signals and times of movement for the night were set. Under the campfires, men checked weapons, prepared armor, and hid their tiredness with brief looks at one another. The final nights of great campaigns are heavy, even for the attacking side. Victory may seem near, but it is not certain. Behind the walls there are still people ready to fight. Mehmed knew this, so the beginning of the final assault was also the beginning of the political risk he carried despite his youth. If he took the city, his name would change. If he failed, the whole weight of the siege would turn back on him. The Sultan did not look at Constantinople only as a military target. If he took the city, he would not want to leave it as a ruined field of plunder. The thought of making it an imperial center stood behind his decisions. For this reason, on the eve of the final assault, the walls before him meant both resistance and promise. Behind the stones worn by cannon fire stood Hagia Sophia, the palace area, the harbors, the squares, and the old Roman inheritance. Mehmed's wish to end the siege joined with his desire to possess that inheritance. Yet for that inheritance to remain alive, the city could not be destroyed completely. This double truth makes the nature of the conquest complex. The attack would grow harder, but once the city was taken, the question of government would begin. As night came over the camp, movement on the Ottoman side did not lessen. The sounds of preparation created an uncertain murmur that reached as far as the walls of Constantinople. The defenders could not fully know the meaning of that murmur, but they sensed that a great move was approaching. For Mehmed, the hours of no return had begun. The pressure built over weeks, the wounds opened by the cannon, the changed balance in the Golden Horn, and the decisions inside the army all came to the same point. The order to attack was not only a military command, it was the final blow against the door of an age. While the Ottoman camp made its last preparations, another night would begin inside the walls with a very different silence. When the final attack was decided, the Ottoman army carried fatigue as well as expectation of victory. Weeks of siege had left marks on the bodies of soldiers and on the order of the camp. Keeping an army before walls for a long time cannot be done by command alone. Supplies, discipline, morale, and expectation of reward must all be managed together. Mehmed's leadership was tested here. If the siege continued, the defenders might receive help, the army's patience could fall, and the reaction of European powers might change. But an early and unprepared assault could become a serious failure before the walls. The timing of the final attack was chosen between these two risks. The Sultan decided to concentrate the pressure he had built over weeks into one night. The last preparations in the Ottoman camp looked from outside like wide movement, but inside they had order. which units would advance first, which lines would be targeted, how the areas weakened by cannon fire would be pressed, and when the chosen forces would enter the attack were all calculated. This calculation did not erase the earlier stages of the siege. It made all of them part of the final. The move into the Golden Horn divided the defense. The cannon weakened the stones. Probes measured the defenders' reactions. Long, waiting, tired both sides. The final assault stood on top of this accumulation. The weight of that night therefore gathered in the War Council's decision and in the long line of preparation that made the decision possible. On the night before the last great assault, movement in Constantinople took on a meaning deeper than preparation for battle. People walking toward Hagia Sophia gathered under the same dome after days of arguments and fear. The matter of union with the Latins had still not been solved in every heart. But that night divisions stepped back. The city came together not because the argument over faith had been resolved, but because it had found no other roof under the approaching danger. The light inside Hagia Sophia did not remove the darkness outside. It only allowed people to face that darkness together. In the trembling light of candles, soldiers, clergy, nobles, foreign allies, and ordinary people stood on the same floor. This scene is one of the strongest truths of Constantinople's final hours. The divided city leaned on the same prayer for a brief time before its fall. Constantine carried the weight of the imperial title more quietly that night. His presence in Hagia Sophia should not be imagined as a ceremony of victory, but as the measured stance of a ruler preparing for his last duty. The sources tell us that he stayed in the final defense and died, but we do not have certain words that reveal his inner life that night. For this reason, the weight of the place must be felt without giving him invented speeches. Under the dome where prayers were spoken, he looked at the faces around him and at the silence of one of the city's most sacred spaces. The days filled with defensive calculations, gate orders, and hopes of aid had narrowed that night to one simpler question. When morning came, who would stand where? The presence of Cardinal Isidore and Orthodox clergy in the same space did not erase earlier tensions completely, but it arranged them differently for the final night. The prayers read in Hagia Sophia had a stronger effect than political documents of union, because people were no longer debating whether a decision was right. They were trying to meet the end that was coming. Among the people were those who disliked the Latins, those who still thought Western help had been too little, and those who still hoped for rescue. But that night they all entered the same rhythm so that the city's voice would not break apart. The service was more than a spiritual event. It gave moral strength to the defense. When people left Hagia Sophia, theological problems had not been solved, but they had at least seen that they could remain together until morning. For Giustiniani and the military leaders, the night was not a long time of rest. After the service, they had to return to the walls, place units, and inspect the last preparations. Giustiniani's weight in the scene was harder and more concrete. Unlike many who stood under the dome, he knew in the language of earth and stone where the morning would come from. On which line would the chance of a break rise? Where would tired soldiers be held? Who would wait before the gates? His mind worked with these questions. Constantine's spiritual and symbolic weight stood beside Giustiniani's practical attention in the same night. The city's last defense prepared for mourning through prayer and weapons together, forced into the same night. When the crowd leaving Hagia Sophia spread back into the streets, Constantinople moved away from its usual night sounds. Doors closed more carefully. Footsteps in narrow streets were heard more briefly. The shadows of those going toward the walls passed across the stones. Some people returned to their homes, some to churches, and some to defensive work. No one knew the result with certainty, but everyone felt that this night was different from the others. Constantine did not withdraw to the palace to hide himself in a safe place. His path moved from the stone center of the city toward the defensive line. The meaning of the emperor on the final night became clear here. He was going toward the most fragile point of the city he ruled. This movement gave the answer of that night without long explanations. Near the walls, the night was cooler. Movement and sound from the Ottoman camp made it clear that the attack was coming. The defenders took their places. Some carried icons with them, some adjusted their armor, some only looked into the darkness. The candlelight of Hagia Sophia had been left behind, but the calm weight it gave had not yet disappeared. Before Constantine, there was no longer diplomacy, expectation of help, or debate about union. There were only the walls, his men, and the approaching morning. The last night of Constantinople deepened not through great words, but through people quietly taking their places. The city approached its fate without shouting. Stones, prayers, and guards waited in the same darkness. The power of the last service did not come from promising a sudden miracle in the middle of war. It came from gathering people into the same breath for a short time. Those present in Hagia Sophia did not know what would happen in the morning. Some still wanted to believe help could come. Others were inwardly preparing for this to be the final night. Yet the same tiredness lay on all their faces. Days of cannon fire, worry over supplies, religious tension, and defensive watches became one heavy silence beneath the dome. Candlelight, bowed heads, and deep quiet already spoke enough. The trembling of candlelight on stone surfaces, a soldier lowering his head under armor, and an old churchman continuing the service without raising his voice, carried the emotion of the scene. The city tried to listen to itself one last time. Constantine's most important quality in this scene was not that he was alone, but that he was visible. It was not expected that the emperor would disappear, hide, or separate himself from the people on that night. His presence in Hagia Sophia carried both spiritual and political meaning, but for him, this moment was more than a sign of rule shown to the people. While all the city's contradictions, losses, and hopes gathered in one place, he stood at the center of that burden. We cannot know his inner thoughts in certain sentences, so his actions carried more meaning than imagined words. After the service, his movement toward the walls was clearer than any speech. The emperor's answer on the last night was hidden more in the direction of his steps than in anything he might have said. When the Ottoman attack began in the darkness, the last night of Constantinople passed from stillness into action. The first waves aimed to tire the defenders, deepen their sleeplessness, and disturbed the order before the breaches. The sound before the walls was different from the cannon fire heard for days. This time people were moving, orders were being given, ladders were being carried, and directions were being searched for in the dark. The defenders understood from the first moment that this was not an ordinary probe. Giustiniani's men and the Byzantine units held their positions. Constantine appeared at the critical line and tried to keep morale from scattering. At this stage of the battle, heroism meant not rushing forward, but not moving from one's place. Everyone had to protect the narrow space assigned to him. When the first attacks were thrown back, no real relief came on the walls, because it was clear that new waves would follow. The Ottoman plan had been built in a way that would not allow the defenders to win in one clash. When one wave drew back, the night did not become fully silent. The preparation for another movement could be heard. This rhythm wore the defense down. Soldiers had to manage shields, stones, arrows, short moments of rest, and the sounds coming through the darkness all at once. Giustiniani's hard order mattered greatly here. He tried to preserve the sequence of duty instead of panic, where support would go, where a breach would be closed, and which men must not fall back. Constantine's presence showed the soldiers that the emperor stood inside the same danger. On Mehmed's side, the assault was watched carefully. The Sultan did not expect the first waves to bring the result immediately. He waited for the defense to tire, for mistakes to multiply, and for the critical moment to appear. This staged pressure was the final form of the order built during the previous weeks of the siege. The wounds opened by the cannon were tested by human movement during the night attacks. Ottoman soldiers came forward in waves, but each wave also served the larger calculation. They were doing more than trying to climb or break through. They were forcing the defenders to spend strength, change positions, and lose the clarity of command. Inside the city, the sound of the assault reached homes and churches in broken pieces. People who had left the last service stayed behind doors or in sacred places. Some could not tell whether the noise meant victory or disaster. This not knowing was one of the hardest burdens of the people under siege. Those on the walls could at least see what they faced. Those inside had to guess from every sound whether the city was resisting or failing. That night, the city fought in two places at once, on the walls and in the silent fear behind closed doors. At the most critical points of the walls, the defenders came close to being pushed back several times, but the order did not completely break. Giustiniani's men stood beside Byzantine defenders before the breaches. This cooperation did not erase earlier religious and political tensions, but at that moment it placed a duty above them. Who was Latin and who was Byzantine moved into the background. Who held the line became more important. The strongest thing Constantine could do then was not to remain distant as emperor, but to be visible beside the soldiers. His presence in the final defense and his death as the city fell remained among the heaviest truths of the siege. His presence that night built the believable foundation of the ending. He did not wait in the palace for news of the fall, but remained inside the defense. As the night moved on, the first resistance could look like success, but the success grew heavy. Every attack thrown back took something from the defenders' strength. Every repaired breach was closed with a little more haste. Every short pause made the next movement seem harder. While the Ottoman side created the exhaustion it had expected, Constantinople was still not completely broken. This balance carried the tension of the final hours. The city had not fallen, but it no longer had the defensive order of earlier days. The quiet weight of the last service in Hagia Sophia gave way to the heavy flow of orders in the dark and tired breaths on the walls. Before dawn came near, everyone on the walls felt that the long night would grow even longer than itself. The rhythm of the night attacks tired the defenders' perception before it tired their bodies. After each assault, there was a short gap, but this gap was not rest. It was a space in which they listened for the next one, approaching footsteps, commands, and the sounds of metal mixed together in the darkness. Sometimes the defenders felt movement before they could see the enemy. In such moments, tension gathered less in open detail than in the approach of what could not be seen. Giustiniani's order tried to control this uncertainty. He kept his men before the breaches, directed support to the correct places, and prevented panic from turning into disorderly movement. His military value appeared precisely in this dark confusion. Knowledge of war sometimes means not great plans, but knowing who must stand where in a narrow place. For Constantine, this night was the passage from the abstract meaning of empire to its concrete presence. He was no longer only the bearer of the Roman name, he was also a face seen by the men on the wall. This visibility mattered to the defenders. The fact that the emperor was in the same danger, not somewhere else, held the remaining strength together for a while longer. But the scene did not need excessive heroism. Constantine was not a superhuman figure. He was a tired ruler under pressure, moving with limited means. That is what made him powerful. That night he shared the darkness, the noise, and the uncertainty like the ordinary defenders. In this way, the final imperial duty left the language of the palace and came down to stone, watch, and the line of defense. The heaviest moments of the final assault showed that the defense rested on morale as much as on stone. As the Ottoman attacks intensified, pressure became more dangerous in the areas weakened by cannon fire. Defenders shifted in narrow spaces, looked for support, and held before temporary barriers. Giustiniani stood at the center of this order. His experience, his effect on his men, and the military coordination he had built with Constantine were among the supports of the defense on the land walls. For this reason, his wounding or removal from the fight meant more than the loss of one commander from the line. It shook the trust the defense had in itself. The event had a serious effect on the defenders' morale. The weight of that moment was felt less in graphic detail than in the sudden change of order. When Giustiniani withdrew, the eyes that followed him saw more than a wounded commander. Some saw the beginning of the end of the defense. In a battlefield, perception can be as powerful as reality. The presence of a leader gives those around him a reason to endure. His departure creates a feeling of emptiness, even in the strongest place. Constantine noticed this emptiness. His wish that Giustiniani remain, or his effort to keep men from breaking from their positions, belongs naturally to the final hours described in different ways by the sources. But at that moment, the effect of words was limited. In darkness, noise, and exhaustion, reports quickly change shape. The withdrawal of one person can become, in the mind of a crowd, a much larger unraveling. The matter of Kirkoporta is also remembered as one of the most debated details of these hours. In some accounts, a small gate left open, or a point of entry that weakened the defense, comes forward. Modern history treats this subject carefully and shows that the fall of the city should not be reduced to a single gate. For that reason, Kirkoporta remained not as a certain cause, but as an uncertain report moving through chaos. The collapse of the defense was the combined result of days of bombardment, exhaustion, superior pressure in numbers, the move into the Golden Horn, and the final assault. A rumor can guide people's fear, but it cannot carry the whole weight of history by itself. This distinction keeps the burden of those hours from being reduced to one accident. On Mehmed's side, the critical moment was felt to have come. As the defense shook in certain places, chosen troops could be pressed forward more effectively. As the pressure of janissaries and organized units increased, the defenders left on the wall had to fight the soldiers before them and the panic growing behind them. In battle, a break often becomes visible suddenly, but the road to it is long. So it was in Constantinople. Weeks of cannon fire, shrinking rest, inadequate manpower, and the waves of the final night became a visible crack with Giustiniani's withdrawal. The city had not gone completely silent, but the voice of the defense was now more scattered. Constantine's role at this point is the heaviest part of the ending. He saw the defense beginning to come apart and still did not draw back. This did not need to be explained. His place spoke clearly enough. The emperor tried to hold the line with the men who remained. Orders no longer restored the old order completely. They only delayed the scattering for a little while. Even that delay had meaning, because in the last defense, gaining time became almost the same as preserving the city's final honor. The expression on Constantine's face was not drawn directly by the sources. To give him certain inner words would damage the historical uncertainty. But the place where he stood was enough to show his state of mind. On the most dangerous line of the walls, inside an order that was shrinking. As dawn approached, the breaking of the defense became irreversible. Ottoman soldiers began entering through critical points, and defensive lines began to separate from one another. People inside the city first understood this, not from official reports, but from the change in sound. The noise from the walls flowed in a different direction. Some people ran towards certain gates. Others stood in streets trying to understand what had happened. Yet the weight of that moment was felt less through violent detail than through the change of direction inside the city. The real force of the moment lay in the collapse of order and in the brief delay before people understood. The defense of Constantinople came apart first, not in the stones, but in the chain of command and morale. Giustiniani's departure became the most visible breaking point of that chain. After it, the city was carried toward the morning when its last emperor would disappear from sight. What could be seen in those hours was not the details of open violence, but the breaking of order. A unit drawing back, commands mixing together, some defenders not knowing where to run, reports from inside the walls changing shape, and the direction of sound shifting toward the city were already powerful enough. The weight of collapse can be given without detailing violence. Constantine's continued presence on the line stood like a final point of balance against the emptiness created by Giustiniani's departure. But the balance was now very weak. There are moments on battlefields when one side still appears to resist, while the whole structure has already leaned beyond return. The final hours of Constantinople approached that point. Dawn would bring not rescue, but a light that could no longer hide the result. After Giustiniani's withdrawal, the order near the land walls loosened, as if a hand had been pulled out from between the stones. Men who had known only moments earlier which sound belonged to which command began to look longer at one another's faces in the same darkness. In this confusion, Constantine XI no longer appeared like a ceremonial ruler. He was a defender carrying armor, the marks of sleeplessness, and the expectation of those around him. When he moved with a few men toward the shaken places in the line, no one opened a broad road for him. There was no road. There were only narrow passages, hurriedly carried materials, reports mixing together, and fear flowing backward. The emperor's presence created a small but noticeable resistance against that flow. Those who saw him did not hear long speeches. What they could see was a face still fixed on its final post, a tired gaze still measuring the people around him, and a will trying to hold inside the breaking line. As dawn approached, the Ottoman pressure no longer advanced from a single point, but from connected breaks. An opening in one place became news in another. The news grew in the darkness and turned into new panic. Weeks of cannon fire outside the walls, the changed balance in the Golden Horn, reduced rest, and the waves of the final night all gathered into the same hour. In these hours, Constantine could not see the whole city, and he could not know whether every order had reached its place. But where he stood still carried meaning. For the remaining defenders, the emperor's nearness made the old order feel not entirely gone for a few more minutes. Then the sounds came closer, the passages became narrower. Some men flowed back and some stayed where they were. The exact line of that moment is not clear in the sources, but what must be told is not an invented last word. It is the emperor disappearing from sight at the center of that uncertainty. It is not possible to trap Constantine's final moment inside one certain picture. Later, writers did not describe where and how he died with the same clarity. Some details mixed together, some remained silent. The power of the scene therefore rests in the part that cannot be seen. The emperor disappeared from the eyes of historians on the last line of the siege. From a certain point onward, what tells his story is not the detailed view of a witness, but the absence that followed. No new order came from the palace. No organizing voice of the emperor was heard inside the city. The Byzantine throne did not continue through a ruler moved to safety. The crowd near the land walls took one man and the long imperial name he represented into the same darkness. This disappearance was heavier than a staged death scene, because where certainty fell silent, history left only the result. Constantine XI died in the final defense of Constantinople, and with him the ruling chain of the Eastern Roman Empire was broken. The people inside the city did not understand this all at once. Near one gate, news spread by running feet. In another street, people still tried to tell the sounds outside apart. Those heading toward Hagia Sophia entered without knowing what had ended. Some closed the doors of their homes, some looked toward the harbor, some only waited. The end of great empires often does not appear to the people living through it as one clear sentence. First, familiar signs disappear. The usual military order is no longer visible. Old officials do not know what to say. The sense of direction is shaken. Constantine's disappearance was felt in this way. No clear call rose to find him, but his absence spread over the city. The crossing of the walls was a military result. The emperor no longer being visible showed that the last center inside Byzantium had also fallen silent. Morning approached the old capital with this silence over it. On the morning of May 29th, Constantinople woke to another day with the same stones. When the sun rose over the Marmara, the shores of the Golden Horn, the land walls and the dome of Hagia Sophia were still in place. Yet the city no longer lived in the order of the day before. Ottoman forces had entered. The commands of the Byzantine defense had scattered. The direction of the streets had changed. People passed through roads they had known the night before with hesitation now. A gate was no longer a threshold to be protected, but a boundary already crossed. A square was no longer a familiar space of daily life, but a place where a new power moved. There was no need for open, violent detail. The transformation appeared in the lost direction on people's faces and in the silence of those standing at doorways. Some took refuge in sacred places. Some did not leave their homes. Some looked toward the harbor and could make no decision. The city had not ceased to exist, but the voice that governed it had changed, and the old imperial center had emptied from within. When Mehmed II entered the city, he began to appear not as the ruler outside the siege, but as the master of the capital he had taken. The city that had been watched for weeks from behind cannon and moats now stood before him, tired, shaken, and still great. That greatness increased the meaning of victory. Mehmed's movement toward Hagia Sophia was more than a step toward a building. It was the moment when new authority began to settle into the memory of the city. The dome that had gathered prayers and fears the night before began that morning to turn into a symbol of another order. Mehmed's success here did not remain limited to passing the walls. The place that had been taken had to be kept alive, arranged and tied to the idea of a new capital. The later meaning of the conquest grew from this point. Constantinople would not be left merely as a captured city. It would become one of the centers of the Ottoman world. That morning, victory and government, military result and political future met on the same line. On the Byzantine side, the loss was too large to be understood at once. For Lucas Notaras and the other representatives of the old order, the names of offices were still remembered, but the ground beneath those names had been pulled away. The palace circle, churchmen, Latin representatives, and the people all remained inside the same uncertainty. People do not live through the end of an empire in the clear sentences of history books. First they see that familiar orders no longer come, that known officials grow silent, and that places which gave safety yesterday have taken on another meaning today. The absence of Constantine XI was the quietest truth of that morning. There was no emperor across from the conqueror to be received in surrender. The last ruler had disappeared within the defense. This absence told the end of Byzantium more clearly than any official announcement could have done. There were still people, objects, domes and streets in the city. But the old political center that held them together no longer worked. The new morning was neither only lament nor only victory. For the Ottomans, a great gate had opened. For Byzantium, a long age had closed. The same walls were preparing for new watches, the same harbors for new trade, the same sacred buildings for new meanings. But continuity did not remove the weight of rupture. Constantinople remained physically standing, yet it entered another history. Mehmed's conquest would later become a will to rebuild the city through population, construction, administration, and symbols. That first morning was the starting line of all that long transformation. People did not yet know what would change or how. What they knew was that the night would not return. The dome of Hagia Sophia still stood against the sky. The golden horn still touched the same shores. The stones of the walls remained where they were, but the city's breathing had already been tied to the rhythm of another age. The last night of Constantinople continued to live between history and memory. At the reliable core of the sources remained the fact that Constantine XV was the last Byzantine emperor, and that he died in the city's final defense in 1453. Yet the details of his final moment were never fully illuminated. This absence did not weaken his memory. On the contrary, it made the last emperor remembered less through one certain scene and more through one final stance. His name drew strength, not from the clarity of a grave, but from his uncertain disappearance near the walls. For Mehmed II, the same night and morning became one of the greatest turning points in Ottoman history. The taking of the city was more than a military success. It was the beginning of the will to create a new capital. In this way, the same event carried two memories together: an ending for Byzantium and a rising center for the Ottomans. The city continued to carry both memories. Hagia Sophia, the Golden Horn, the land walls, and the old squares took on the meanings of the Ottoman age without erasing the traces of Byzantine centuries. For that reason, the story of Constantinople cannot be reduced only to defeat or only to conquest. That night was the moment when long centuries gathered into a narrow darkness. On one side stood the young sultan beyond the walls. On the other stood the last emperor at his final duty inside. When morning came, one had opened a new future and the other had left his name at the closing of the old world. Constantinople fell, Byzantium ended, and an Ottoman capital was born. But the last night was not forgotten, because some cities are more than taken or lost. Some cities keep the night that changed them inside their stones. Today, the city that was once called Constantinople is known to the world as Istanbul, one of the most important cities of the Republic of Turkey. It no longer belongs to one empire, one court, or one age. It stands as a vast, living metropolis where many layers of history continue to meet every day. Its streets carry the memory of Byzantium, the grandeur of the Ottoman centuries, and the modern rhythm of a republic that looks toward both Europe and Asia. The Bosphorus still divides and joins continents at the same time, while ferries cross its waters as naturally as armies and merchants once crossed the same horizon. In its markets, neighborhoods, bridges, mosques, churches, synagogues, palaces, towers, and crowded avenues, Istanbul keeps the mark of a deeply cosmopolitan city. People from many backgrounds, languages, beliefs, and traditions have left traces there, not as separate fragments, but as part of a long and complicated whole. For this reason, Istanbul is not only a place where history happened, it is a city where history still breathes through daily life, through the call of gulls over the water, through footsteps on ancient stones, and through the quiet endurance of buildings that have watched civilizations rise, change, and pass into memory. Yet Istanbul is not merely a museum of vanished worlds. It is alive, restless, crowded, beautiful, and unfinished. It is a city of morning traffic and evening lights, of old wooden houses and glass towers, of fishermen on bridges and ships moving through one of the most meaningful waterways on Earth. The same skyline that once carried the fear of siege now carries the movement of millions of lives. Hagia Sophia, the land walls, the Golden Horn, the old imperial roads, and the shores of the Bosphorus do not stand apart from the modern city. They remain inside it, surrounded by voices, work, prayer, trade, music, memory, and change. Istanbul's importance today comes not only from its past, but from the way it continues to transform without losing the depth of what came before. The city has been Roman, Byzantine, Ottoman, and modern Turkish, but it has never been only one thing. That is why its story does not end with the fall of 1453. The last night of Constantinople became part of a much longer life. The city survived its own turning point, changed its name, changed its rulers, changed its language of power, and still remained one of the great crossroads of the world. I hope that as you end your day, this ancient epic has been a good story for you. I look forward to your comments and requests. Do not forget to follow my channel. May the darkness of the night and the rhythm of the sea bring you peace. Until we meet again in another legend, in the breath of another hero, love.